Travelers of Reddit, what are your vacation horror stories? First solo international vacation, flying from Chicago and connecting in Hong Kong. This series of events made it the worst. During boarding, there's an announcement that the reading lights in business class do not work and an electrician is coming to fix it. When the electrician is done, the plane is de-iced and pushes back from the gate only to sit there for 10 to 15 minutes before another announcement that the reading lights have gone out again. The plane goes back to the gate. The next announcement is that the time we've already been delayed plus how long the electrician needs to actually fix the issue plus flying time would time out the crew and also get us to Hong Kong past a reasonable hour. The flight is delayed until the next morning. Because checked bags have already been through customs, they're staying on the plane. The next morning, we took off after a brief delay. 3 or 4 hours later, there's an announcement asking for a doctor. Soon after, there's an announcement that a passenger needs emergency care and will be diverting to Anchorage to drop them off. In Anchorage, the guy is taken off the plane. I later learned from his seatmate that he had packed medication in his checked bag and being without it for a day messed him up. During pre-takeoff maintenance, some mechanical issues are discovered. Again, the time to fix it would time out the crew. We're overnighting in Anchorage. I ended up booked into a wing of a hotel that's been closed for winter. It's December and they opened the wing just for passengers from this flight. It was literally freezing in the rooms. Everyone was given a space heater. Warm water took a long time. It was miserable. The next day we departed without incident. We arrived in Hong Kong at the same time as the same flight that left 2 days after ours. I was flying from Krabi, Thailand to Denver. It involved 3 connections. Krabi-Bangkok, Bangkok-Tokyo, and Tokyo-Seattle. There were long layovers, including a 13-hour overnight one in Bangkok. I have chronic incurable insomnia. I've been on sleeping pills for almost 20 years. And I cannot sleep on airplanes, no matter how drugged up I am. Overall, it took 52 hours to get from Thailand to my house. I slept for maybe 45 minutes in that time, in 5 to 10 minute spurts. I started hallucinating from sleep deprivation on the way back from Seattle. Nothing scary, just kept seeing divider curtains on the plane that weren't there, thinking a flight attendant was behind me when nobody was nearby. By the time I landed, I was seeing light visual patterns like the kind people see when they take a small dose of acid. Just knowing my brain was slowly ceasing its normal function was really scary. I was terrified that when I got home, I still wouldn't be able to sleep, and it would get worse. Being awake for over 2 days straight was a really terrible travel experience. Went to China. Went to Nanjing. Took a train to Xi'an with the expectation I would be coming back in 2 days to my hotel room in Nanjing because my flight to get back to the US was 6 days away, so I should have more than enough time to prepare and catch the flight. Nope. My fault, I missed the train the first time. Not important, buy ticket for 1 more day and extend my hotel another day. Second time, there was a blackout and that caused absolute havoc and the ride got cancelled. Extend 1 more day. Oh, the ticket's sold out, so I have to extend it to another day. People affected by the blackout overbooked the ticket, filling out the spots for the entire next day. Third time, the day I was supposed to fly back, my taxi driver got into an accident on the way to the train station. Tickets sold out for the day. Can't wait till tomorrow because my flight was that night. I somehow booked a flight to get back to the hotel in Nanjing from Xi'an, got my stuff packed, and made it to the airport half an hour before the flight. Somehow got checked in and boarded at the last second. I thought I would have a heart attack each day. Not me, but a friend. Flew to Australia to work for a couple of years. Had been there for a couple of weeks looking for work. Met a guy who offered him work, but my friend had to pay $2,000 up front for the tools and PPE. Guy predictably didn't answer my friend's calls after. My friend only had $3,000 left when he paid the $2,000. So, he bought a ticket back home. He tells people he lived in Australia. Doesn't tell people he lived there for less than a month and got defrauded by the most obvious fraud ever. My friend is an idiot. I suppose I should preface this with a warning that my vacation horror story involves a battle with food poisoning. Maybe don't read this one over lunch. In August of 2019, I loaded a bunch of camping gear onto my bicycle and spent the better part of the next 7 months riding 5,300 miles, 8,500 kilometers around much of the US. At night, I most often preferred to wild camp, simply finding somewhere to disappear into the woods for the night, somewhere people were unlikely to find me and even less likely to care that I was there. One day, I was in southern Washington state, heading towards Portland, Oregon. It was one of those days where I didn't really have anything planned other than to ride my bike all day and see what distractions would come along the way. As I passed through a small town around 11:30, I decided to stop for lunch. I'm vegan, but at the time Burger King had just recently launched a new veggie burger. I'd had it a few times before on this trip, and liked it well enough, so that's what I did for lunch on this day. An hour or so after lunch, I realized it definitely wasn't sitting quite right with me, but my mild indigestion didn't slow me down on the bike. That evening, I ended up wild camping in the woods somewhere. After setting up camp, I used the final few minutes of daylight to write in my journal and plan a little bit for the coming days. Pedaling 80 pounds, 36 kilograms, of bike and camping gear all day every day is hungry work. I estimate I usually ate about 4,000 calories a day. So usually, my evening journaling is accompanied by plenty of snacking. But on this particular night, I didn't have much of an appetite, which concerned me. After turning out my light, I laid down in bed, trying to go to sleep. But my slight indigestion quickly took a turn for the worse. I felt nauseous, and eventually it became so severe that I was sure I was going to throw up. I would sit up in bed, hand on the zipper of my tent door, ready to open the door and lean out to vomit. But after sitting up for a minute or two, the nausea would fade away, and I'd lay back down. Finally, around 11:30 that night, I threw up. I rinsed my mouth with water from one of my bottles, drank some more water to help replenish the fluids I'd just lost, and laid back down feeling much better. I actually managed to get an hour or two of sleep, but around 1:30, I woke again, feeling even worse. I went through the whole cycle again, throwing up once more about an hour after I woke. Rinse my mouth, drink some water, and go back to bed. I woke for a third and final time around 4:30. Thankfully I never ended up vomiting again, but that soon before sunrise, I knew I was unlikely to get back to sleep. So, I spent the 3 hours or so until dawn making new plans. Getting back on the bicycle in my condition was going to suck, but I was out of water and didn't want to stay there in case I continued to take a turn for the worse. There was a town about 30 miles 50 kilometers ahead, where I planned to put myself up in a cheap motel for a night. But right around daybreak, I started to hear the soft patter of rain falling on my tent. Checking the weather on my phone, I didn't expect it to last long, so I packed up everything inside my tent, my sleeping bag and air mattress, clothing, etc. Then when the rain broke, I could simply toss my bags outside, take down the tent, and hit the road. After just 20 minutes or so, the rain stopped, so I made my move. After loading everything onto the bike, I pushed it back to the road, got on, and realized I had a flat tire. Just my luck, right? But that's an easy fix that I had the tools and parts to deal with, so I got to work. Of course, in my less than ideal mental state, it ended up being a much more complicated process than it had any right to be, and by the time I finally had a tire that was holding air, it had started raining again. It wasn't even 8 a.m. and today was already by far the worst day of the whole trip. But there wasn't much I could do at this point other than put on my rain jacket, turn on my lights, and continue on my way. So, I rode for the next 3 hours or so through chilly rain, tired, sick, hungry, and dehydrated. I was miserable. Every rotation of the pedals felt to require Herculean effort, but I somehow kept moving, eventually arriving at that town. I stopped by a grocery store, got a few light foods that would be easy on my stomach, and then went to the motel. I arrived several hours before the check-in time, but I must have looked as miserable as I felt, and they let me into a room. I took a long shower, called my mom, and then slept 13 hours straight. The next morning, I woke feeling much better, and after a light breakfast, I felt good enough to get back on the bike. My goal for that day was to make it 60 miles, 100 kilometers, to Portland, Oregon, a city I'd been looking forward to visiting for some time. 60 miles would be a fairly long day for me even in the best of health, but the ride went smoothly and relatively quickly, and I arrived at a hostel in Portland in the early evening. The next morning, I definitely didn't feel 100%, but I did feel good enough to go out to a museum. Or at least I thought so that morning. But as the day went on, my food poisoning started to catch up with me. So, I returned to the hostel a bit earlier than I normally would have and spent the evening resting. The next day started much the same. Woke up feeling okay, but not great. This time, though, I decided against going out, instead of staying in the hostel all day. Which was a really good call, because the food poisoning really came back hard on this day. But that must have gotten it all out of my system, and the next morning, I woke up feeling great. Breakfast went down easily, and a half hour or so later, I still felt fine. So, I went back out to explore the city a bit more, and still felt fine after a full day on the move. A couple of years after finishing college, my wife and I went back to our college town because a couple of friends of ours decided to leave their post-graduation and were getting married. We got a room at the recommended hotel to save a few bucks with the group rate and had a good first night catching up with them. Then, the day of the wedding, the catering group failed to show up, and I volunteered along with a couple other guests to help put the food out and serve. I saw about 2 minutes of the actual ceremony and maybe enjoyed 10 minutes of the reception. Then, going back to the hotel that night, I noticed some red bumps on my arm from causes unknown, which was confirmed a couple of days later as bites from bed bugs. The suckers ended up catching a ride home with us and we didn't notice them until we had already done all the things you aren't supposed to, like throw our bags open on the bed at home after an exhausting drive. Took 6 months to get them fully killed, which included turning off the AC and running space heaters in the bedroom on a day when it was already 90+ degrees outside to nuke them finally. At least my wife got to enjoy the weekend before the infestation. We went on a trip to Heva's younger cousin's baptism to see a party after the baptism in a kind of casino. It was a very old and luxurious building. Me and my cousins decided to go explore and we entered like a basement without light. Everything was normal until we heard very intense noises and a shadow of a strange person. My cousins and I got scared. We ran out and we got lost. We kept running until we reached some stairs. When we opened the door at the end of the hallway, we ended up on the 5th floor of the building. It was strange because the stairs only went up 1 floor and remember that we were on floor -1. My family flew from the West Coast to go to Disney World for a few days, then drove up the East Coast to visit some extended family we hadn't seen in a while, and then flew home from the airport near family. There was a shuttle from the hotel to the theme park, so we weren't worried about transportation. We booked a van, using a debit card a month in advance, for the last day in Florida that we would pick up in the morning, pack our luggage, spend the day at Disney, and then drive to see our family. With COVID going on and the constant change in travel restrictions, we would call customer care about once a month to make everything was still good with the reservation. We even called a few days before left just to make sure there were no last-minute changes. Every time we are told that there are no changes, and our trip can go as planned. Come the last morning, I leave with a friend to pick up the car while wife and kids eat breakfast/get ready. The car is ready and waiting, I just have to check in and leave. I get to the service counter, and they then tell me that 1, they have to have a credit card on file, they don't accept debit cards, and 2, their cars are GPS tracked and can't leave the state. Neither wife nor I have a credit card due to some money problems in our past, and we had obviously planned to leave the state. I brought up the fact that we reserved the car months ago using debit card, and when making a reservation we had to put a destination in for the car, neither of which was a problem at the time, nor were they problems when we called the customer service multiple times. I'm essentially told tough luck and there's nothing they can do from their end, and they just have to cancel my reservation no matter my protests. Which kicks off 2 stressful hours where I needed to find a last-minute car rental or figure out how to change my family plans. The car rental places around were 1, local places that only rented short-term local rentals, 2, at the airport where you had to show a boarding pass that was from the last 24 hours to get a car, 3, would take debit cards but I couldn't get a car the same day, 4, just didn't have a vehicle big enough to fit the family in our luggage, or 5, a combination of the previous numbers. Finally, someone took pity on us and got us a van that could fit everything and accepted debit cards with same-day reservations just in time to half enjoy our last day in Florida. I was 15, my family and I went on holiday in Montenegro. In order to reach that country, we needed to pass Serbia. But the GPS malfunctioned, and we were diverted to Kosovo, then to Serbia and Montenegro. Kosovo was an active war zone when we passed it. Me and my father were taken from our cars and put to the ground. We were threatened with death by the Kosovo authorities. My father was beaten almost to death. They destroyed almost all of our things. They stole all our cash. They were harassing my mom. Documents confiscated then retrieved. Car tires slashed. The only luck we had was that my mother called someone who works at the embassy. And we were rescued later that day. After we returned, nobody did anything. Nobody. I could have lost my father and my mother day that. Because some idiots were entertaining themselves. Never going back there unless I am armed.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.